You sure you want to take that? A space elevator customs official said, as he pointed to a 55-gallon barrel sitting on a hover pad. Of course, sir, Carl Green replied. The barrel in question, nestled among his personal effects and luggage, contained the finest 180 proof moonshine a man could buy out of another man's backyard still. Carl had taken a detour out to Franklin County, Virginia, to buy the large barrel. Carl was a Kentucky boy through and through, but he had to admit those guys outside Roanoke knew how to make a mean spirit. The damn thing cost him 3 months' pay, but it was worth it. You do know the folks up there can't handle more than 10 proof, right? The official said, pointing up to the sky for effect. Look, I'm not the brightest star in the sky, but even I know that. Besides, why would I share my booze with anyone? Carl replied with a grin. The official laughed. I hear ya. That's some powerful stuff. I swear I'm getting buzzed standing next to it. Lightweight, Carl ripped back. Sure, I'll stick with beer, the official retorted before waving him through. Elevator free, cargo slot 8. Carl gave the official a wave and pushed his hoverpad out of the customs lot. Carl scanned the crowds past the security. The press of humanity was traveling to their space elevator stations, browsing overpriced wares at station shops, and waiting in seating areas for their scheduled departure. It would be the last time for a while before Carl saw a single-species crowd again. Earth, to all of the galactic inhabitants, was classified as a death world. The planet had, at least according to the denizens of the galaxy, crushing gravity, wildly variable temperatures, horrific weather, and terrible predators. To Carl, it was home. One of the downsides of being human was Carl had to return to Earth periodically to correct the negative effects of low gravity. If he spent too much time out in space, it would begin to negatively affect him. Basic galactic law stipulated the gravity aboard private vessels would be set to the home planet of the lowest gravity species. Meanwhile, species from higher gravity worlds were required to receive vacation time back home. Humans, being from a planet with a substantial gravity gap from the next heaviest planet, had 2 months of leave every year. Because of this, humans were popular with smaller freightliner crews, while simultaneously the bane of the freightliner operators. If a human was aboard, the rest of the crew was, by proxy, also granted 2 months of vacation a year. After taking his spot in the elevator, Carl stopped to peer out the window. He watched the land below vanish as the elevator smoothly rose into the atmosphere and beyond the clouds. The whooshing outside the window faded as the elevator breached into the border of space. Carl took the moment to peer out of the top window. The elevator was held in place by the new celestial elasticine that a bunch of guys down in Florida developed a couple years back. Once the engineers figured out the right thickness, the material proved perfect for the function. Carl wished he was there to see the initial demonstration. Using a moon as a slingshot sounded incredible. After the elevator pulled into the station, Carl exited and found his assigned docking port. Looking out the portal, he was happy to see his ship, the Crooked Weasel, waiting. Reaching the ship, he waved at the indicator panel outside the cargo hatch airlock. Hey, Darla? I'm here. Unlocking, the voice came over the intercom. The airlock hissed open after the indicator light turned green, allowing Carl to enter. After cycling, Carl took a step onto the Weasel and immediately felt his weight cut in half. This was the result of the ship's gravity set to 0.5 G to accommodate Darla. As Carl was stowing his moonshine barrel, which even at half gravity was close to 200 pounds, he heard the door leading to the rest of the ship hiss open. You have a good holiday? Carl huffed as he dropped the moonshine into its space and lashed it down in an open spot next to the fire suppression system. He turned to look at Darla. Her name really wasn't Darla. It was something that Carl struggled to pronounce, but it sounded close enough to Darla that she didn't mind. Darla was a Sinapian. She reminded Carl of a reptile. She stood at roughly 6 feet tall and had light green scales, with a colourful fan that ran down the crest of her head along her spine and disappeared under her suit. She had 5-fingered hands like a human, and didn't have any kind of visible claws. Her feet were digitigrade with boots made for her species. Despite the appearance, Synapians were actually warm-blooded mammals, which was proven by her chest that was equivalent in size to a healthy female tennis player. Athletic. According to Earth scientists, the Synapians would be what an intelligent species would look like had they evolved from an ancient Earth animal called a Dimetrodon, which is a cousin of sorts to mammals like humans. They developed scales instead of hair, since their homeworld was warm and arid. Looking at her tickled a few instincts in Carl, which he suppressed, since it wasn't appropriate to fraternize with a business partner. There are a few types of people never to get involved with: business partners, co-workers, and anyone who has to be nice to you as part of their job, like a waitress. Not bad. It's nice to be back out in the void, though. As fun as Earth is, it's good to be back on the job. Her face screwed in mock disgust. Nice! I still don't understand how you don't get crushed down there, let alone found a way to get off that gravity planet. Strong bones and insane ancestors, Carl replied. He maneuvered the final strap into place to keep the barrel stable. While the barrel wouldn't roll around in the artificial gravity, Carl always liked to take extra precautions. Even a mild disruption in the gravity field could mess up a cargo hold. Darla's head crest fluttered, which signaled her curiosity. What do you have in the barrel? This here? Carl patted the barrel. This is 180 proof Appalachian moonshine. Remind me again, what is this proof? Darla asked. Divided by 2, and that's the percent of pure alcohol in here, Carl said with a grin. Her forked tongue flicked out in disgust. Ugh, a shot of that would kill my people. How do you drink it? Carl laughed. A small shot would burn like mad going down. I didn't buy this to drink straight. This is a nice base. I'll dilate it down with water or some other drink to give it a nice buzz. You sure you don't want to try? It'll put hair on your chest. Darla shook her head. No, I don't want hair on my anything. I'm sure you look great with a beard. Carl joked his business partner. Darla gave a snorting hiss laugh in return. Sure, you'd like that, I bet. I'll go get the ship ready to go. We have a big shipment scheduled. See you up there after you get settled in. Carl loaded his gear into his room. He regarded the space and recalled the ancient science fiction shows from pre-FTL Earth. They showed cramped spaces similar to old ocean-going Navy ships. His room was spacious and comfortable, twice as large as the personal quarters of the show, with the bald captain character in it. It turns out space is rich in metals appropriate to make starships and advanced systems ensure most ships don't require much in the way of crew. Carl could have run the ship by himself, but it was boring in space, and he decided to go into partnership with Darla. The pair met when they were both in university, in orbit over SDI 6. Meeting in an economics class, the two were put on a project to evaluate the galactic freight industry. While they were doing the project, they saw the amount of money shippers were making, and decided to drop out and work the space lanes. Getting established wasn't easy. They had to pool their resources to buy the ship, and it took a few years to build a reputation. Now they just had their first big shipment. Carl walked into the bridge and took his seat next to Darla. Ready to go when you are. Excellent, Darla replied. I already obtained the pre-clearance. Our departure is in 5. You feel ready for this? Carl asked, suddenly feeling uneasy. What's this? The great Carl Green is nervous? The guy I met when he challenged the professor on monetary theory, right in the middle of class? Darla teased. That was just a professor, Carl replied. I don't want to mess this shipment up. The shipment in question was a rhodium exotic particle alloy. Rhodium was already a ridiculously rare metal in the universe. The alloy with the exotic particle was even more costly. The manifest required them to take the Weasel to a facility on the edge of the event horizon of Sagittarius A. It was a difficult route to take. Facilities needed to be that close to allow the time dilation effect in the gravity well to work its magic on exotic particle stabilization. Black holes were also a valuable source of plasma to power the reaction necessary to create the particles. Further, the facility was run by human engineers. A few months ago, they had a terrible accident where they sent an experimental insulator into FTL, where it embedded into a trace station some 20,000 light-years away. Rumors on the net and claimed it was a plate of nachos, which Carl didn't believe because it was the Net. The facility needed a clean, on-time delivery after being out of commission for a few months, while Carl and Darla needed a win to get the better jobs. The FTL was uneventful. A downside of being a duo was that they had to stop every 10 hours to get some rest. Galactic flight regs required they always have 2 personnel on the bridge while the ship was in FTL, and they were limited to 10 hours per day. Maximum transit time per day was a rule that bristled the trucking industry, back to the old internal combustion engine days. As advanced as they became, rules never seemed to change. Not that Carl disagreed any. It was better than being burnt out on space station stimulants. 1 week later, they reached the final approach to Sagittarius A. They had to drop out of FTL a day away by a sublight engine, since it was too dangerous to drop out of FTL the standard distance from a station. The time dilation effect messed with navigation computers, even though the station itself wasn't in the window. The ship also had to stop a day out to wait for confirmation, since it was dangerous to approach an exotic particle manufacturing facility while it was in operation. This one more so since its last accident. Carl flipped the comms on the ship. "Particle Station Huntsville, this is the Crooked Weasel. Requesting dock to load the rhodium alloy shipment for Auto Factory Gi'a'ak, over." They waited for the signal to reach the station. They had to use an old EM band communication system, since the black hole screwed with the subspace communication channels. At this distance, it would have taken 8 hours there and 8 hours back. After 24 hours passed, they didn't receive an answer. Darla looked over at Carl from her seat. "Do you think it's the time dilation?" Carl shook his head. "No. It should be far enough outside to not interfere with the comms." "What should we do?" Darla replied. Carl thought a moment. They couldn't risk going any closer to the station if there was an accident. Exotic particles were no joke. They had to keep a close eye on their own FTL reactor to make sure the exotic particle catalyst container didn't rupture. If there was a wild particle event, they risked getting sent who knows where. It sometimes winked ships out of existence, and no one knew where they were off to. Some thought it was to a different galaxy, or maybe even a different plane of existence. All Carl knew was he wasn't about to get Darla and himself isekai'd off to some other dimension. "I'll send a follow-up. If we don't get an answer, we'll call in the authorities." Carl flicked the EM comm unit again. "This is the Crooked Weasel calling Particle Station Huntsville. Is everything okay over there? If we don't receive a response within the normal transit time for this message, we will contact Galactic Rescue. Over." "I really hope nothing is wrong," Darla commented, her crest flickering with worry. "Same here. No point in sitting here. Come on. I want to show you a movie called Jurassic Park," Carl said, as he stood from his chair. "It's not one of those movies you think I'd like because it has people like me, right?" Darla said, with a side-eye glare. "No," Carl started, before moving out of the bridge to get some popcorn. He smirked as he turned. He liked messing with Darla. She gave as good as she took it. Her people had a horror film with giant hairless ape-like creatures that were similar to humans she had shown him the night before. The following day, Carl and Darla were waiting on the bridge for the response to come back. Seconds after the 16-hour mark, a voice came over the speakers. The voice sounded strange. "This is Particle Station Huntsville. All is good. Please dock in Bay A2. Carl and Darla looked at each other. Carl spoke first. "That was weird." "Think it's something to do with the exotic particles?" Darla replied. "Dunno, that's beyond me. Well, we got our orders. We're already a day behind schedule. Let's get going," Carl said, as he plugged in the coordinates. He pushed the sublight engines up to 80% of light to try and make up for some of the delay. They couldn't go much faster, or they'd risk overshooting the station and ending up in the dilation window. That would be a scheduling disaster. Another day passed, along with the scheduled rest break of 10 hours, before they were able to make visual contact with the station. The station was a standard array, a long tube oriented at a tangent to the event horizon of Sagittarius A in the background. The black hole's plasma jet shot far into the void from the poles. It made for an impressive sight this close. Without shielding systems, Carl and Darla would have been cooked in their ship. Carl peered at the station through the bright viewport. He found something off about it. An unusual ship was attached to one of the cargo docking bays. It wasn't a human-designed vessel. The 4 human-designed transit shuttles were attached to the residential wing. "You think that's another delivery?" Dollar asked. Carl hummed. "Probably. Wonder why they've been docked so long. We'd have expected to pass them, and we didn't see them show up. Probably came in from a different vector." "This is the Crooked Weasel. We're in position to dock. Over," Carl said over the EM comms. Nothing returned. Carl looked at the control tower and saw the lights were off. Something ain't right here. Darla looked out the viewport. "They'd be expecting us. Think there's a power problem? That would explain the strange transmission." "Maybe. Let me see if the station will accept a docking request," Carl said as he entered the console commands. The station readily accepted the docking request, which added to the confusion. It usually required an internal approval. Perhaps the power issues triggered an emergency docking procedure. The Weasel spun as the autopilot aligned the ship docking bay with the station. With only the slightest of thumps of metal on metal was heard when the 2 portals connected. Carl stood and prepared to leave the bridge. "Well, let's see what the problem is. Hope it doesn't delay us any further. It looks like those other fellas may be stuck in the power outage." Darla followed. "All right, standard procedure. You head out first and set the gravity in the cargo bay. I don't want to fall on my knees again like the last time we got on a human-only ship." Carl snorted. Cargo bays and space stations had the option to set their local gravity to a different level than the rest of the station. This allowed for the station to set the cargo bay to the lowest preferred gravity of a visiting species, without disrupting the gravity settings of the permanent population. It either required on-station staff to set, or the highest gravity species present on the ship. Since Carl was human, he was always, by default, the one to exit and set the gravity. After opening the ship's bay, he stepped through the airlock. Putting his foot out, he expected the force of 1 Earth gravity to kiss him, with her comforting 30-foot-a-second force. Instead, he stumbled as his foot entered a zone of slightly lighter gravity. "Darla, something is definitely wrong here. Gravity is lower than the ship." "What? Do you think the species on the other ship is visiting the rest of the station?" Darla asked. Something felt wrong to Carl. It's not normal for a freighter crew to show up in the residential areas. Say, can you go check the markings on that other ship from the viewport? "Sure thing," Darla said as she rushed back into the ship. She came out a moment later with her head fin folded flat. "Something is definitely wrong. That ship has markings of a freight company that went tips up about a year ago." Carl cursed under his breath. Damn, pirates. Darla's expression turned grim. "Should we try and escape?" Carl shook his head. "Knowing them, they'll use the station defenses to shoot us down. They want us here to take our ship." "What should we do?" Darla asked. "I'm going to get the 4 sluggers. I have a bad feeling we're not getting out of this until we verify they are pirates and we're not just being paranoid. It's not like we can call for help since the black hole is interfering with subspace comms," Carl said, with blood pressure rising. He really hoped he was wrong, and the station crew was just having tea with some visitors. Carl found the locked weapon cabinet on the bridge and opened it with his thumb. Inside were 2 standard 4 sluggers. The human-designed ones were shaped like old Earth M1911 pistols. After checking the charge, he set the pistols to 500 psi and returned to give Darla hers. She looked at the pistol with surprise. "You're not playing around." Carl nodded. "Yup, that's a moderately trained fighter's punch force back on Earth. I'm not going to crank it up to pro boxer level until I know what we're dealing with." Darla looked at her pistol with a slight tinge of fear. She held in her hand a human-designed weapon. Even the force throwers that were used aboard ships and stations to avoid puncturing the hull. Handing Darla a 500 psi punch gun was at the extreme ends of what her species could handle, even with the recoil distribution. Her setting was like trying to fire a 500 S&W round out of a revolver. It would kick like mad in her grip. Carl, on the other hand, could push his as high as 1200 psi before he struggled to control the weapon. That kind of punch would flatten the skull of all but the most durable aliens in the galaxy. It was something other species couldn't control. If 500 psi was the equivalent of a 500 S&W in Darla's hand, the 1200 psi setting would be like a human trying to hand-fire an old M224 motor. "Stay behind me," Carl ordered. Darla hissed. "I don't need protecting." "Not the time, Darla," Carl snapped. "You can hit me with that four-slugger, and while it'll hurt like crazy, I can survive it. It'll cave your chest in." That got through to Darla, who stood close behind Carl for cover. The pair crept down the connecting hall from the cargo bay to the main station artery. Darla kept her hand on Carl's back to keep a proper distance and movement control. They reached a door which slid open. Carl carefully peeked around the corner from one edge of the door, remembering cutting the pie maneuver from a game he played as a kid. When he verified the one side of the hall leading to the rest of the cargo base was clear, he did the same to the one leading the other direction. It was also clear. The pair crept down the main hallway and passed by the first cargo bay where the mysterious ship was docked. Inside, the pair saw stacked boxes of rhodium alloy rods. Carl cursed again. "They're trying to steal the alloy. No way a proper shipment would have just left them sitting out like that." Darla's breath became short and rapid as panic set in. "Are you sure we can't get out?" Carl pointed to the airlock leading to the pirate ship's cargo hold. "Look, the light's red. They have the place on lockdown. We're going to have to clear it if we expect to get out of here." After verifying no one was in the cargo bay, Carl continued to press forward with Darla at his back, having a mild panic attack. Carl didn't blame her. He didn't want to face down some unknown enemy any more than she did. He did know, however, there was no other option to get out. His only solace was the lighter gravity that was even set for Darla meant there'd be a manageable fight. The next door opened, and after slicing the pie once more, Carl began walking down the long hallway. He was lucky the station design was simple. Everything was built along a series of fairly straight lines. Nothing was likely to come up behind them. They also had regular emergency bulkhead door frames they could duck behind if something was shooting at them from the other direction. The station was eerily quiet. The only sound accompanying them was the sounds of their breathing and the low hum of the station's power core. They reached a door designated as the particle accelerator room. Opening the door, Carl peered out and immediately pulled back as a wave of visible force moved through the air and impacted on the wall. Carl cursed. "They're waiting for us." Darla was too panicked to say a word as her hand shook. Carl cranked his four-slugger up to 1200. It was apparent that he was dealing with pirates, and it didn't make sense to play nice. Quickly darting his head out, he got an idea of who he was dealing with. He only saw 3 out in the open before pulling back again. Dropping low, Carl prepared a shot. He hoped they were aiming high, where Carl had previously shown himself twice. He quickly leaned out and snapped up a shot, happy his youth involved a lot of plinking in the woods. He cracked off a single shot easily at the central alien before pulling back. He didn't wait to see the results. The sounds confirmed what he visually missed. A wet squelch followed by shocked cries of the pirates rang down the hall. Carl heard the sounds of retreating footsteps. Once more, Carl quickly peered around the corner and saw the 2 aliens had left. On the floor was the blue-green ichor of a dead pirate. The pirate was an avian alien with a colourful loose garb. The force slug impacted the alien on the beak, shattering it into yellow shards that now littered the ground. "Jikkors," Darla sighed. "Never heard of them," Carl replied. The galaxy was a big place, and it wasn't unusual for one species to not know another existed. "They're insular, and don't really leave their sector of space. Problem is, a lot of them that do end up as pirates. No one really knows why, since their formerly flagged traders are peaceful and fair." Darla said. "All our species have rotten eggs," Carl spat. "Come on, let's keep moving." The pair passed through the lab area and saw the giant particle accelerator array. On it hung a sign that read, "No food" on it. The next door was labelled as the mess hall. Opening the door, Carl had to pull Darla aside once more and shove her against the bulkhead frame. A pair of force slugs grazed his back, leaving an unpleasant sting. He knew it would be bruised in the morning. This time, the slugs came fast and regular. Carl was barely able to pop his head into the opening before he had to pull back. One of the force slugs barely skimmed his nose. Any closer, and the appendage would have been broken sideways. What he saw was not good. He didn't get a good count on the number of Jakors in the room. What he did know was the mess was filled with the feathery enemies, and the tables were tipped over to form makeshift barricades. Carl once more cursed. "We're not getting past that." "So we're screwed then?" Darla said, defeated. Even though one of those force slugs wouldn't kill Carl, getting pummeled by dozens or more of them would end him. He may be a Death Warder, but he wasn't invincible. Carl's mind suddenly gave him a strange vision. "I think I have an idea. We need to run back to the ship." "Why? They'll just blow us up," Darla said with fear in her voice. "No time. Move ahead, I'll cover you," Carl said with a push. He closed the mess hall door and paced behind Darla as they moved. Squawking was heard behind as they ran. Force bolts whizzed by, crashing into the walls and scientific equipment in the accelerator room. Carl kept his body in a position to shield Darla from the effects of the attacks. As he turned into the hall leading to the cargo bays, he took a force bolt to the ribs. It knocked the wind out of him from the full force of a punch in a drunk brawl. He kept running. More bolts came, hitting him in the shoulder, another in the kidney, and a third in the back of his head. He saw stars as he pressed forward, keeping his friend shielded all the while. Another turn led into the final cargo hall. This time, his nose was hit with a force bolt. Carl smelled copper and felt the liquid drip down his lip. He would have to ignore it for now. The pair pushed into the cargo bay and into their cargo hold, where Carl slammed the door controls. The cargo hold closed shut. Turning, he looked at Darla. Her eyes opened wide and her frill waved frantically. "You're hurt!" "Don't worry about me, this is nothing. Are you injured?" Carl replied. "I'm fine," Darla said. "Good," Carl said. He pushed her toward the living area of the ship. "Go, hide in there. I'll be by in a second." She ran back into the ship and vanished into her living space. Carl looked over at his moonshine barrel. Fiddling with the hover pad, he maneuvered it over to the barrel. As he worked, pounding could be heard in the exterior hatch before it went silent. He suspected they were attempting to breach the security software and override the door. Working fast, he heft the moonshine barrel onto the pad and ordered the pad lifted. As he moved the barrel higher, Carl went to the fire suppression system and pulled the drain plug. Fire suppression liquid leaked out onto the floor, and after the system drained, he plugged it again. He then pulled the hose feeding the tank to the sprinkler system. After opening the moonshine barrel cap, he snaked the hose inside and began to siphon the liquid. He sputtered as a little got into his mouth. He then fed it into the fire suppression tank. After the siphoning finished, he pulled the hose and replaced it on the system. Turning to the control panel next to the door to the interior of the ship, Carl began pressing commands. First, he set a timer for 5 seconds after he began the sequence to open the cargo bay door. Second, he set another timer for 15 seconds that would set the interior ship gravity to 1 Earth gravity. He silently sent an apology to Darla for having to endure that part. Third, he set the fire suppression system to activate in tandem with the gravity increase. Finally, he set the overhead lights to turn on after 10 seconds. Turning the bay lights off, he reached up and unscrewed an LED bulb. He then fled back to the door and, taking a deep breath, pushed the sequence start button and closed the door. Moving back to Darla's room, he quickly grabbed her and laid her on the floor. She chirped in surprise at his contact. He shielded her body and waited. He heard a distant hiss as the cargo bay door opened. He heard the thunder of countless feet enter the cargo bay, followed by angry squawking. Then, the gravity suddenly kicked in. He resisted the pull on Darla's hand with his hand to keep it from bouncing on the floor. Angry shouts echoed from down the hall as Carl heard the hiss of the fire suppression system, filling the room with aerosolized moonshine. Finally, a powerful whooshing explosion boomed from the room. Then all the shouts and squawks silenced. Carl waited a bit longer, blood dripping on Darla as he held her up against the pull of Earth's gravity. As she wheezed in the heavy gravity, Carl laid her down gently, stood, and set the console back to her preferred force. "Are you okay?" She took deep breaths and calmed down. "Yes, I can't believe you humans live like that every day." "The getting attacked by bird aliens or the gravity?" Carl asked, finding his humor in the aftermath. Darla shook her head in silence. Carl carefully approached the door to the cargo bay. Inside, Small fires were still burning along with the smouldering bodies of the Jakors on the floor. He counted at least 40 in the room. His moonshine barrel was also on fire as the residual liquid inside burst into flame along with the wood. Carl suddenly felt deflated. 55 gallons of top-quality booze up in an instant. The ship's filters kicked in and started cycling the smoke out of the air. The fire suppression system above continued to pump away, tanks empty of suppression fluid. After Carl hustled Darla out, he filled the tank again to allow the system to put out the remaining fires. Thankfully, after checking the integrity of the ship, the hull wasn't damaged. The open cargo bay door was able to direct the force into the station, where it dissipated in the large room beyond. "What was that?" Darla asked in surprise after she calmed down. "Oh, you see, moonshine is volatile stuff. While modern still operations don't have this problem, back in the early days of a period we called Prohibition was going on, stills would blow up all the time. So I decided to aerialize the moonshine and make a makeshift airburst bomb in the cargo bay," Carl explained. Darla shook her head. "And you people drink that stuff? What made you think of it?" Carl shrugged. "I just suddenly thought about fried chicken." Darla's head crest waved, indicating she didn't get the reference. "I'll bring some back up next time I'm on Earth. I think you'll like it," Carl explained. The pair returned down the hall, going slowly once more to ensure no more Jakors were waiting for them. Carl's dripping nose had finally started to scab over, and the dripping stopped. There were 4 more Jakors in the mess hall guarding the door leading to the station's command center. They weren't expecting a human and a Sanapian to show up after 40 of their compatriots stormed down the hall. Carl and Darla made quick work of the surprise pirates. Opening the next door, they found the human crew bound and gagged to their bunks. All 10 of the humans looked like they were hit a few times with the Jakor's force sluggers. Carl and Darla quickly freed them. One of the humans came up and gave Carl a shake. "Thanks for the rescue, bud. Name's Marshall Johnson. I'm the station manager here." "Hey, Marshall. Carl Green. I'm here to pick up the rhodium alloy rods," Carl replied. "From your accent, Kentucky?" Marshall said. Carl nodded. "Well, gonna have to be a little less rough on you boys next time the Wildcats play the Tide," Marshall said with a grin. "Don't bother. We're gonna beat you silly next season," Carl said, not believing a word of his own boast. The pair shared a laugh at the absurdity of the Wildcats beating the Crimson Tide in football. That hadn't happened since the 20th century. "Anyway, what happened?" Marshall said. "I'm surprised a freight hauler managed to take out a few dozen pirates. You certainly look like you took a few hits." Carl explained what he did to defeat the pirates. Marshall winced when Carl talked about sacrificing his moonshine. "Damn, boy. That's a powerful sacrifice. I'll send you the contact info from a cousin of mine. He makes a great batch and I'll tell him I sent you his way. It's on me." "Mighty kind," Carl replied. "If you don't mind, though, I'd like to get that rhodium shipment on the way. We're already a day behind, and I'm sure you don't want to be any later than I do. Also, do you have a place I can sweep a bunch of pirates?" "Don't worry," Marshall said with a wave. "The boys and I will clear them out. We'll stack them in Bay Free, and after we take a shuttle out, we'll contact the authorities to pick them up. We'll also give your ship a look over to make sure the fire didn't damage anything." The station crew moved the bodies and gave the Weasel's cargo bay a good scrub. They even restocked the fire suppression liquid. Then Carl and Darla were on their way. After their designated break period began, Carl decided it was time to look at his nose. Peering in the mirror, he tenderly pushed it around. It was definitely broken, and he put up with the pain to move it sort of back where it belonged. It would take a few days before he'd see a doctor. They needed to make the delivery first, which would take them 2 weeks. "Here, let me help you with that," Darla said, after she came into the bathroom behind Carl. She picked up a rubbing alcohol bottle and dabbed some on the cloth. "Can't have you drinking this in your depression." Carl chuckled. "That would even make a human go blind. Not a good idea." Darla dabbed the remainder of the dry blood and looked closely at Carl's face in the mirror. "Well, it looks close enough." Carl shrugged. "It'll do. My brother looks far worse after he got into a bar fight. Wasn't even a good reason. He decided he didn't like some other guy walking in wearing the same shirt." Darla snorted before her arms interlocked around Carl's waist. Before Carl could say anything, her snout reached by and gave Carl a kiss on the cheek. "Whoa, what was that for?" Carl said in surprise.
"Sorry. I've had a thing for you since college. I was too shy to say anything, but after today, I think it's not a good idea to keep it in,"
Darla said with a warm smile. Carl put his hand to his cheek. "Darla, that's not appropriate. We're business partners."
"Husbands and wives run businesses together all the time,"
Darla said with a wink. She pulled away and, with a flutter of her head crest, sashayed out of the room. Carl looked at himself in the mirror once more. Oddly enough, the moonshine had sparked something in him, and he didn't even have to drink it. Maybe it was time to reconsider his off-limits list.